So today we have this session on MF Husain, and this session is being chaired by Kishore Singh ji. Welcome. And we have the paper presentations by Abhinav Mishra, Noreen Fatma, and Shatavisha Mustafi. Paper readers, please come and take your positions, and welcome Kishore Singh ji. Please come.
Take your herd along. Take my herd. My herd is already missing.
Go.
She'll get here, I believe. Come. Thank you. Okay, are we good to go? Yeah. Push that. Some kind of a green light would appear. Yeah. But it goes off. Yeah. Noreen is running late, right? Shatavisha is running late. Noreen is running late.
I'm the what?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to check. Okay, morning and welcome. I don't think one could have asked for a more interesting artist to kind of position this discussion around. When you think of MF Husain, the first thing that comes to mind is popularity, mainstreaming, etc. And the many facets that he offers up, both of course in his lifetime and post his passing in 2011, very many manifestations of his art-making practice, of his self, and the narratives around his art that lend themselves to so many interpretations. So I think it's very interesting that you picked on Husain. Before we start that, I would like to ask both of you, and Noreen when she's here, why was it that you picked Husain? What drove your choice? Where was that interstices where you met Husain for the first time and turned it into your PhD?
Yes, my
Yeah.
PhD.
All right. Would you like to take that on? Just very quickly before the papers are presented.
Yeah. I work on Husain and stardom, and I use the theories around on film studies around stardom and celebrity culture, and then look at Husain. And my first interaction, I think, with Husain was definitely way before I saw his art. I saw the artist, and growing up in Calcutta, I didn't know much about Seema Gallery, but they would always have one Husain painting and then advertise this. I got curious that what is this? Who is this artist? And even if you don't encounter the artwork, everyone knows his name. So what are the reasons of his popularity? So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I just kind of, it kind of helps engage and understand what motivates and drives your kind of scholarship and readings into the artist. Abhinav, if you can also just share very briefly your first knowings, meetings, or where you engaged with Husain, whether personally or of course eventually I imagine as a scholar.
I think all of us who are students of art history encounter Husain. Anyway, so when I I'm going to converse in this context. When I was thinking of applying here, and I'm a student of pre-modern, not a modern and contemporary. So basically, I thought of I'm going to write on Souza more, because whenever I'm working on the ideas of gender and sexuality and how it's getting censored. So I thought, okay, Souza is someone who is painting a lot of obscene images, but then I got to know that Husain has like more than 1200 cases against him because of the obscenity. So then I thought, okay, this guy is very popular, but also having so many cases against him. Then this idea of censorship and also the time that we are living in. So I thought it would be a great platform to engage with Husain, and since I'm someone who is more interested in the miniatures, but also this idea of censorship and how the bodies are being desecrated by the public eyes and also maybe through the artist. That's such a complex terrain that I just wanted to look into.
Okay. All right. These are all very interesting and argumentative positions that we're looking at. Obscenity itself and the idea of obscenity and what it defines or holds within it. We'll begin with the papers. I'll read out a little bit of what each of you is presenting. But please, can we keep this within the 15-minute parameter? I will otherwise pull the rug from under your feet, etc. 15 minutes is a lot of time. It's a lot of time to understand positions. Abhinav Mishra, your Central and the Sacrileges, Husain's Art in Post-Hussain India, is an essay that attempts to decipher the complex idea of censorship, offense, and transgression, keeping the opus of Husain in the center, while also highlighting how his artwork cognitively represents the Indian modern art movement on a global pedestal. You also kind of contrasted Raja Ravi Verma and his body of work, I see, over here. So I'm, in a sense, also trying to preempt this by saying that you are positioning the debate between aesthetics and freedom of expression through a legal perspective, perhaps. The one question I would always ask is, was Husain, in Shakespeare's very famous words attributed for Iago in his play Othello, was Husain more sinned against than sinning? Also, personally, I would, when you're framing this debate, etc., I hope you brought it in. Otherwise, keep in mind the fact that Akbar Padamsi's Lovers was the first of these works of art, etc., against which case was registered, and I think that's a very formative element somewhere. So when you come in over here, we're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say. 15 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for showing up on a Saturday morning, and thank you so much Raza Foundation for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. So I'll start. Despite a plethora of scholarship on Husain's obscene artworks, he continues to mark his presence both as a sacrilegious artist and as one who is immensely celebrated. In 2025 itself, while two of his artworks were seized by the Delhi court accused of being offensive, just 2 months later, his artwork titled Gram Yatra was sold at an auction, antithetically becoming one of the most expensive pieces of modern Indian art. With the majority of religious minorities working as artists, criticism of Husain's oeuvre marks a cathartic moment. Husain's artworks suffered in the new democracy, and now as detractors, partisan attempts and private complaints emerge. They not only reveal the trajectory of cultural politics reception, but also the fractured dialectics of art and offense. With the rise of muscular majoritarian politics, the contour of bodily aesthetics and how the artworks, which are usually drawn from the mythologies for aesthetic purposes, bear the violence of incarceration. This
presentation attempts to decipher the complex ideas of censorship, offense and transgression, keeping the opus of Husain at the center while also highlighting how his artworks cognitively represent the Indian modern art movement on a global stage in the present. Geeta Kapoor says that he is, in quotes, hardly an intellectual in one of her monographs, despite appreciating his art. So what makes M.F. Husain still relevant in visual culture, and how does the desecrated and dilapidated idea of othering still exist in certain public spaces post his demise? We see too much of M.F. Husain. His horses hold a distinctive familiarity, his popularity second only to Ravi Verma. How is it that Ravi Verma's woman in diaphanous saris be termed a classical turn in art, while Husain's religious figures were called banal? Through a thorough case study, primarily of his disputed art exhibitions, which was dragged into court for obscenity charges, this presentation attempts these inquiries and highlights Husain's role, a self-proclaimed apolitical artist, in creating works that continue to resonate politically. Back in 2008, the Delhi High Court, in a significant judgment, quashed numerous cases filed against Husain, which were related to one of his artworks, which became controversial when it resurfaced again. Painted in 2004, the so-called Bharat Mata was initially an untitled painting that depicted India through an abstract landscape with a nude woman at its center. Her hair flows freely, alluding to the Himalayas, and her legs are folded, suggesting to viewers the contours of India's political boundaries. The painting made the artist's life insufferable as he received numerous threats and harassments. Husain sold this painting to a private collector in 2004, and it resurfaced in an online auction again in 2006, with the proceedings from the sale donated to charity by an NGO for the benefit of Kashmiri earthquake victims. The renaming apparently occurred for this auction, likely to gain wide publicity, which it did, unfortunately. The case was dealt by 2008 by the Delhi High Court, resulting in a verdict that is quite unusual for the present time. The court, in its decision, mentioned, in real democracy, the dissenter must feel at home and ought not to be nervously looking over his shoulder, fearing captivity or bodily harm, or economic and social sanctions for his unconventional or critical views. There should be freedom for the thoughts we hate. Freedom of speech has no meaning if there is no freedom after speech. The reality of democracy is to be measured by the extent of freedom and accommodation it extends. Even in a recent case, back in December 2024, a lawyer named Amita Sachdev posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, that two of Husain's paintings at the DAG are on display and should be considered offensive paintings. This painting was part of an exhibition titled Husain, the Timeless Modernist, and it depicted Ganesh and Hanuman, as if you can see the images. She chose to share images from a private art gallery on social media, noting that some of them could be considered sensitive or potentially offensive. We can read and reflect on the discourse of what actually causes discomfort in certain viewers, which poses a threat potentially to the right wing. Is it the expression, the choice of specific religious or national figures being represented in a hedonistic or voluptuous manner, or is it more about the identity of the artist itself, which creates a hindrance? There is a pattern, if one can notice, which is also suggested by Kajri Jain, regarding the deployments of desecration affecting Husain and his artworks. That means every time there is a deliberate process of fabricating an offense through that artwork, and once the attention is gained, there is potential of precipitating the taking of the offense. These campaigns were structurally snowballed from a local to a national to a global level. In these cases, social media played a major role in the circulation and mobilization of certain conservative groups to safeguard what they think the idea and iconography of the nation. Eventually, that iconography fetched 8 lakh rupees, though later on the artist was forced to pull it from the public exhibition and issue an official apology statement. Still, there were 1250 cases filed against him, which included the charges for obscenity, offending religious sentiments, and inciting inflammatory speeches. The years between 2006 and 2008 saw a dangerous escalation in violence against the artist, which included attacks on Asia House Gallery in London, the Sehmat Show at New Delhi, and the Ahmedabad office of NDTV, which started an SMS poll on whether he should be awarded Bharat Ratna or not. One thing to note here, and a fact which one cannot overlook, is Husain's identity. In all these cases, the resolution offered by the other party was never intended to have a communication or remove the artwork in question. On the contrary, the focus was more on the artist. Shiv Sena's Bhagwan Goel announced that he'll give 5 lakh rupees as a reward to whoever cuts one of Husain's arms. In the Sehmat exhibition, which included Parthiv Shah's photographs, the vandals mostly targeted Husain's photographs and not the artworks that he produced, evidently fixating on the artist's persona rather than his oeuvre. One can think of other acts of iconoclasm or vandalism which is image specific, and there were certain attempts, as noted by Dario Gamboni in The Destruction of Art. He discusses the symbolic values associated with certain art and cultural heritage, which falsely gives the impression of a democratic nation state, but somehow naturalizes inequality. In the last few years, we have seen some protesters splashing major artworks with tomato and pumpkin soup to draw the attention to the climate crisis. Gombeni observed the suffragettes' iconoclasm, and Kajri Jain picks up on their methodology to compare that with the Hindu groups, who claim that they are defamed by Husain. Here they do not challenge the terms of the law but utilize section 295A of the IPC of 1860. This act itself is a colonial output specifically enacted to manage the aftermath of the 1857 uprising, and hence the reenactment of this provision forces a form of religious subjectivization. Not just that, taking extra legal violent steps again reinforces the act of subjection, where one can see the desperation of policing and imposing their sensibilities. Here, this vandalism is different from the suffragettes, as that was calling out the state cultural nexus, and it was highlighting the violence against women through slashing well-renowned women in paintings. Therefore, violence here emerged from the exclusionary policies against women by the state, while violence against Husain emerged through the policing of religious images, which comes under the Brahminical authority. This core Hindutva ideology is ostensibly based on the caste monopoly over textual and iconic form, and where they claim that only certain people can interact with the divine. One can counter-argue that art as a primary cultural capital does not share the same hegemonic status in India if we compare that with certain European countries. For instance, Venus and Saraswati both are goddesses, but the religious status and the representation are of different orders. Greek and Roman divine figures are not imbued with that degree of sacredness, whereas Hindu deities possess a different efficacy. However, Jain asserts that we must keep in mind to read these in a non-European context. There are correlation between the politics of aesthetics and the aesthetics of religion. The Hindu terrain incorporates the majoritarian privilege over the majority religion and also the caste privilege. This is basically an attempt to reconfigure and reassert power based on the social hierarchies and also the appropriation of the idea of the sacred and who owns the divine. It would now be necessary to consider the artist's intention here. Going back to the 2008 judgment would be an insightful case study to bring this up. Husain's defense lawyer, Sanjay Kishan Kaul, mentions that though the so-called Bharat Mata painting was made by the artist, depicting Indian geography in an abstract and graphical form, giving it the shape of a nude woman, but that was it. Husain never engaged with that painting again once it was sold. Hence the title Bharat Mata, the meaning of the image and its public circulation, none of them involved Husain as a person. However, in another argument, Husain's lawyer mentioned that the impugned painting cannot form the basis of any deliberate intention on the part of the petitioner to wound the religious feelings of the complainants, since the figure, on the basis of the identity alleged, represents an anthropomorphic depiction of the nation. Therefore, the idea of the nation is secular, and she is more of a concept and not a goddess who belongs to any religion. Hence, the offense cannot be claimed on behalf of the Hindu community. Husain's lawyer further mentioned that the nudity in question is mild stylized and hardly graphic or anatomically precise, and that Husain's nudes are more intended as an expression of purity rather than obscenity. Karin Zeitzwitz points out that this idea that works of art are the material expression of an individual's emotional and perceptual experience is the discursive mechanism that connects meaning, intention, and subjectivity. To understand or put Husain's work in a secular context is to understand its subjectivity. That is, one cannot disassociate the meaning of the object from the artist and his oeuvre. I do have time, I think.
You have another 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm editing a bit of it. So coming to the conclusion, which is, I think we concluded. So this discussion is an attempt to understand, or at least try to understand, the concept of desecration, its relationship with the community, and to some extent the artist's intention. Though these are just suggestions, and what puzzles me by the end of it is the new controversy with which I started off, the problem of Husain in the post-Husain era. We know very well that he shifted to Dubai after these controversies, and I don't know if that was an intentional statement, but he accepted Qatari citizenship. He took the self-imposed exile, as they call it, till his death. Still, he was in the news again, as already discussed. To explain this, let's return to the title of the paper, which attempted to describe a post-Husain movement, to highlight the legacy of the artist who oscillated between artistic autonomy, if there was any, and identity politics. The extension of Husain's artistic life walked a tightrope between veneration and vilification, highlighting the public sphere's failure to reconcile aesthetic freedom with political sentiment. We can revisit Kant's aesthetic judgment and say that Husain's artwork evokes reflective thought and sensuous freedom. Yet, the Indian viewer's reception presents a contrary picture where the moral subjectivity overrides the autonomy of the artwork. When I call something post-Husain, it is an attempt to describe a shift or perhaps observe a shift. That is not a closure but a transformation. Therefore, his absence in the country actually amplifies his symbolic presence, making the whole discourse on viewing interconnect it with both his oeuvre and identity, as well as severance, censorship, and collective memory. I'm going to leave with this slide. Thank you.
Very insightful, Abhinav. I think that was made some very, very interesting observations. Very quickly, before we move on, I'm just going to flag off one, the troublesome term obscene itself. It troubles me that obscenity, including not just in the legal parlance that we saw, but also in terms of how you begin your paper, reflects only the body and nudity, where obscenity has very many other connotations. Among them, for me, hunger, poverty, corruption, all of these are terms, etc., that lend themselves very easily to it. So it's a term that I think we need to use with a great degree of caution. When we talked about protests and threats, I also need to very quickly point out that this was not just only positioned against Husain the artist in his lifetime, but against all people who were part of the larger platform of the Husain world, etc. So some of those of us who actually worked and created exhibitions around that time, etc., received threats saying that they knew our home numbers, our addresses, etc., etc., and a certain violence would be visited upon us. So I think when we're talking about this, we need to take into account the larger universe. Also question why, when commercial establishments were being attacked by the same forces, the National Gallery of Modern Art continued to exhibit works by Husain. So the state, in one sense, was very ambiguous somewhere. It did offer him the safety of return to the country, but it did not remove the works from institutional spaces. And I think that's something to keep in mind as well. Finally, I think we can't ignore the fact that when you're talking about Tyeb Mehta, the title and the non-titling, etc., that while certain works, there were very tiny works that were removed from the exhibition, there have been cases where customs authorities have stopped the coming of works from overseas into India, including Husain's works, there were Souza's works and other artists, etc. I mean, who attributes these functions to the customs authorities, etc.? Are they schooled in this, and do they have the authority to actually navigate that space and stop the passage of works, etc., etc., which is not part of what they're assigned to do? So I think these are just things to keep in mind when we move on. I'll come to you, Shatvisha. For me, the space that you occupy of the museum and how museums, etc., in terms of holding Indian art, etc., have been conceived and received is something very, very exciting, something that I'm personally very, very interested in. You do question, the whole idea of relevance, etc., of how an important collector can shape the destiny of a region's art or our practice, artists, etc. But I would also keep very definitely in mind the fact that not just collectors and what they extend, but also the fact that India certainly opened up at a certain point in time, and I think you would argue that with the Festivals of India, but that opening up was a very, very critical point in terms of substantiating the holdings of Indian art in museums. Very interested in looking forward to this. Once again, 15 minutes, please. Thank you.
Could we please have the plus lights off as well? I have a lot of documents which we can't read. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before I start my paper, I would want you to look at the title slide, and you see that it's IIC. Quite poetic, I would say that did Husain or the Hurwitz, did they know or knew that, several decades later we will be gathering at the same venue, discussing probably what they were discussing. So without much ado, before I start, I would also like to thank the Raza Foundation and their generous funding, which makes it possible for me to stand before you and present my research. I would also like to thank the Fulbright. Much of the archival material that we will see today was collected during my Fulbright years. Without much ado, the title of my paper is Recipe for Legitimacy, Husain's American Debut and the Politics of Display. By the 1970s, Chester and David Hurwitz, the leather moguls of Massachusetts in the United States, had built an eclectic collection of modern Indian art. Their collection included works by the founders of the progressive art movement like Husain, Raza, Souza, along with other artists like Kumar, Manjeet Baba, and comparatively younger artists from younger generation like Nalini Malali, Lakshma Kauda, Sudhir Patwardhan, Yev Patel, Jogen Chaudhary, Ganesh Oloi, and several others. Over time, the couple amassed nearly 3,400 pieces of 20th century Indian art. In this paper, we will address the following. So we will look at the aspects of, within quotes, honorary patronage, shaping of public perception via several ephemerals, gallery ephemerals, institutional arrogance and rejection, and may I just say also institutional racism, that is, I'm working on that, yet to be theorized, and exhibition strategies in a foreign country. Now, several years later, while deciding the future of this vast and significant collection, the Hurwitz revealed how they intended to open their collection to the public, a dedicated museum with an absolute focus on 20th century Indian art. One may argue that Indian art was displayed in several museums across the United States, but these were works which were essentially part of the existing South Asian art, which included ethnographic objects, or rather several utilitarian and religious objects as well. Now, while these are essential to understand a civilization, in my opinion, displaying contemporary artworks also highlight civilizational progress and the sophistication of the human mind. Only a few years into building the collection, the Hurwitz observed that the relevance is not just by acquiring artworks, but also in order to hold art historical relevance, the artworks must be in occasional view. Driving by this incentive, in 1974, the couple convinced the Worcester Art Museum to host a solo exhibition of M.F. Husain. In a letter to the then museum director, as you can see, Stuart Trades, pardon my pronunciation, to the then ambassador of India, Troloki and Call, it is mentioned that this will be Husain's first ever exhibition in the United States, even though his work has been widely known in other parts of Europe and Asia. The letter sought the ambassador's honorary patronage and the collaboration of the Indian embassy. Of the multiple forms of patronage that are known to us, which is also what my research, my PhD research was on, honorary patronage is relatively new. This particular form of patronage involves a separate kind of capital which carries a lower or no financial stake on the patron, but a greater official relevance of approval. The Hurwitz were aware that building a collection and acting as generous patrons to modern Indian art was not enough. The value of these artworks could only be whipped up if significant players of the, within quotes, art world approve of the artworks and the artist in the collection. Paintings by Husain was held between November 15 to December 15, 1974, and was one of the first exhibitions, while several other exhibitions would follow later. The Public Relation Department, in another letter to Davida, notifies the museum's outreach plan, and they meticulously break it out. How do you introduce a foreign, within quote, a foreign artist to a new country altogether? And what I find again quite interesting is if you see the food bill there, and in the document they say that it will be interesting to offer luncheon to all the critics gathered. So this is like in a very soft way of telling that, oh, we'll give them lunch if they come and cover this show. I would not have believed it, but only after I came across the food bill, I was like, okay, this is something interesting that should be discussed. Now, the museum outreach plan almost reads like a prescription for a successful show and echoes with Arthur Danto's idea on the construct of the art world, where critics and the other players play a significant aspect in determining what qualifies to be an artwork. Similarly, for an introductory show on an artist from a foreign land, the reviews of critics are not only crucial for the artist, but also for the patron who has so far built the collection. In this case, reviews from the critics and the press would have added to the existing value of artworks and can be seen as a seal of approval. The letter concluded with another intriguing aspect, inquiring how the Hurwitz would like to be credited and whether they wish to be acknowledged on the labels beside each artwork. This line of questioning, along with the invitation to the Indian ambassador for his honorary patronage, become significant for understanding alternative forms of value making and value creation. Now, coming to the question of honorary patronage. It is unclear whether the ambassador provided any funding or shared finances for the exhibition. Regardless, the presence of the ambassador of a country at an exhibition acts as a sign of approval of the artist and his work by national representative. Husain in the 1970s had a more than amicable relationship to the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. A year after this particular exhibition, India would witness a baffling public outrage and riots. By 1975, exactly 1 year after this exhibition, India would declare an emergency that would last for the next 2 years. 3 years prior to this exhibition in 1971, India was an ally and played a significant role in the formation of Bangladesh. Though this paper does not highlight the more sophisticated initiative by India post-emergency to promote itself as a modern nation-state through art and culture, it is clear that an exhibition like Paintings by Husain sets the foundation stone for future exhibition and cultural diplomacy. Painting by Husain was one of the many exhibitions that would feature paintings from the Hurwitz collection. One may question the choice of artists since the Hurwitz had several artists in their collection. It could have been a multi-artist exhibition. But in my opinion, it was the success gained at the Sao Paulo Biennale and the opportunity to exhibit alongside Picasso already placed Husain on a global map. I argue that Husain's exhibition at this particular museum was a sort of curtain raiser for modern Indian art and the Hurwitz collection outside India. Although several international exhibition spaces such as Centre Pompidou in Paris, State Gallery in London and the Chicago Art Institute, among several others, would later loan artworks from the Chester and Davida collection, it was initially challenging to introduce Indian modern art to these spaces. Now, during this exhibition, Davida wrote several letters, including to MoMA, to Met, National Gallery, Fogg Museum, several others, and most of these invitation was received unwelcomed approach. Within quote, it is kind of you to suggest that the Fogg might wish to mount a similar exhibition based on loans from you. Unfortunately, our exhibition schedule is extremely tight and our galleries are booked for the better part of the next 3 years. Director Office informs us that it will not be possible to squeeze anything else. Close quote. The Kenny Gallery wrote, the works of Husain is out of our field as we deal mainly in American painting. Also, we are moving to new headquarters shortly and are not adding any works to our present inventory. The Museum of Modern Art, the much celebrated one, also echoed similar idea that they are booked for the next 1 to 3 years and therefore we cannot host this exhibition. The Gallery of Art in Washington clearly invested in the idea that fame and recognition, and I found this like super funny, should be posthumous, responding to the invitation by stating that, within quote, as you're aware, I must inform you that by policy, the Board of Trustee, the National Gallery of Art, may not hold one-man show of work of a living artist. Thus, it would not be possible for us to consider this show. The Met invitation also met with a similar response that our curators are busy and therefore we cannot again display these particular work. Now, I find it extremely interesting when it comes to the William College Museum. They referred this entire exhibition and said that maybe Milo Beach could be interested, but we all know the kind of scholarship that he had done, and that has nothing to do with, or rather very limited understanding the work with modern and contemporary. It's a different kind of a scholar working on completely different timeline, so on and so forth. So therefore, Painting by Husain did not find any other host. Archival sources reveal how the exhibition was carefully, constructed. Attention was paid not only to the content but also to the writers and critics of the exhibition. A fully orchestrated event that led to one of the largest creation of modern Indian art internationally. Now, when it comes to talking about discussing construction of public opinion in a foreign country, I would bring this reference where a professor of economics at the Harvard University and the collector himself, John Kenneth Galbraith, was approached to write an introduction to the catalogue. The then director of the museum, in a letter, writes to him that it would appear to have your view on India, also because he served as an ambassador to India. He was hesitant. He really didn't want to write, and it gets reflected in that document. He just didn't. He wanted to essentially pass off the baton, but he was kind of roped in. However, what I find fascinating is that when he wrote about the Hurwitz collection and Husain's exhibition, both in the newspaper and in the catalogue, he does not essentially talk about the Hurwitz at all. Now, in my opinion, first, his position in the society ensured that his opinion counted in value making. Second, his comparison to Husain to Picasso, equating two artists from two different generations, one internationally renowned and one is yet gaining that kind of popularity. And added certain heft to the Indian artist's reputation. Nonetheless, the clear hesitance of the Economist to contribute to the capital and to the catalogue, and his sidestepping of any mention of the Hurwitz collection in his writing testifies to a diplomat's fine understanding of the difference between promoting an artist on one hand and a collector's collection on the other hand. And finally, I would like to, since we are talking so much about Husain did this and Husain did that, much of what we discuss has already always been pre-planned, as we can see in these documents. Be it Husain's live painting, again pre-planned, carefully decided by the patrons, and I'm not saying that Husain didn't have any say in it, of course Husain had, but also it's premeditative and decided. Also the fact that, Husain appears intelligent and therefore is a great public figure, and therefore we need to amp up that part of it. So let's put him on the television, get interviews, so on and so forth. So that is also gets added to it. Now finally, when discussing about exhibition strategies, since that one-man show or a solo show failed for any other museum to kind of take over, they decided to do away with the format and introduce the group show, at least in my reading or archival research so far, and therefore they bring in alongside the Festival of India celebrations, though these were not essentially part of the Festival of India celebration, not approved, within quote, approved by the state, but these were exhibitions that were being hosted parallelly, and for a person walking in a gallery, they would often feel that this is an adjacent event or an event that is happening alongside. So there is this overlap that is also happening, and the other thing is that every time they henceforth did a group exhibition, it would also have these meticulous outreach planning. Now, one side, I'm not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not here to make a judgment on it, but I'm saying that so far, while drafting the history of 20th century Indian art, we've primarily looked at the artist and the artworks, and the other players of the art world is often missed, including the studies of on institutions. So in order to have a wholesome understanding of 20th century Indian art, I think it's essential that we bring in these figures and maybe reconstruct the way we see history. So on that note, I'm going to end it.
Thank you. Perfect. Can we have the lights back on? Thank you. That was beautifully articulated. A lovely positioning. I do want to understand what you mean by value very often, because presuming there's not commercial value, but value in terms talking about the artist, etc., and the reflections. The constant reference and need that we've often felt in India, which bothers me. Also cross-referencing ourselves with other artists internationally. Why should Husain be India's Picasso, etc.? There's a singular position that you take within your own society, etc. What that means. The whole aspect of patronage that you spoke about in terms of Convened, what it represents, the meaning to be attributed, where the state comes in, yes, where diplomacy plays a part, etc. I think is very, very interesting. I just want to very quickly mention over here that in the 50s and 60s, a large number of museums, particularly in Europe, were acquiring Indian art. They were going in as part of their collections, but they were not being exhibited. So you do make that, you do mention that point, but I think it's very, very important, particularly in reference to what we're seeing today, where the other is now being brought out and being talked about, because that aspect that, art from Asia or Africa simply formed a part of your collection but was not a part of the conversation, is now opening up for debate, etc. There were, of course, other collectors who, have done humongous service, etc. In more recent times, you see even somebody like Tyeb Mehta and their collection and the width of that collection itself, in terms of how they brought that curatorial perspective into collecting. But what it implies, what it means, because you're talking about museums in the 70s not open to and receiving Husain's exhibition. The reviewers talk about the wonderful book that they did, not finding an audience. So there are parallels between the 70s and now, despite the market being what it is. And a very, very quick point, in the 70s, Husain was offered the John D. Rockefeller III Fellowship. He was the only one who was offered the fellowship. I think undertook the journey and chose to return. He did not follow through on that year, etc. So was there also this great disdain for West and patronage in the West? Or was there something else beyond it? And that's an area I would personally love to explore. Maybe not in this paper, but it is something that bears relevance. Noreen, welcome. I know that you're going to be talking about the autobiographical, which again, of course, Ashokji mentioned yesterday that the biographical part of an artist thing, how much do we attribute, how do we read into an artist's work in terms of those biographical elements, etc. But the autobiographical is always featured as a part of Husain Saab's practice. Why did you pick the 3 series that you talk about over here and that you articulate, etc.? That's something that I'm very, very keen on knowing. Also, the one thing that personally interests me is that the personal overpower the professional in terms of Husain Saab's life. Was the artist greater than his own art somewhere in terms of what he presented? But let's hear your paper and then we'll get into the questions. Yes, in case. In case. They've been very good. Ashokji, they've both been very good. I'm sure she will be.
Good morning everyone, my name is Noreen and I am a PhD scholar from Jamia Millia Islamia. Also, this is my first year in PhD and the kind of presentations that I've seen right now are very high and I don't know if I'll be able to equalize that kind of documentation. But let's see. So the title of my presentation is Autobiographical Art as a Tool for Writing Art History, a study of M.F. Husain's visual narrative. So autobiographical art holds a paradoxical position in art history, at once central and marginal. The myth of the artist's life, from Vasari's lives to the romantic cult of the genius, has long shaped interpretations. Yet academic art history often dismisses autobiography as subjective or anecdotal. In the late 20th century and 21st century, however, it re-emerged as a vital site for negotiating gender, sexuality, race, trauma, and identity. This shift is tied to the broader theories of T.J. Clark on the social history of art, John Berger's way of seeing, and Judith Butler's gender trouble. So autobiographical art then is less confessional than critique, reinterpreting the self through visuality, performativity, and the gaze. So my theoretical foundation of this approach comes from these three thinkers, which were T.J. Clark, who argues that modern art should be read as social context. John Berger reminds us that way of seeing are shaped by power and experience, and Judith Butler's performativity helps explain how identity is constructed through repetitive act together. So these frameworks help us see autobiographical art as a form of historiography. Now the objective of my paper is to understand how autobiographical art helps in the understanding of art history, examine the shift in autobiographical discourses, and then analyze Husain's autobiographical writing and painting as interwoven narratives, to understand how personal symbols evolve in national allegory in his later works, and how Husain's self-reinterpretation becomes a method for writing art history. So, art history in its classical and modernist formulation has long prioritized style, chronology, and collective movements over the intricate realities of individual experiences. The artist self has often been treated as biographical context, etc. Yet art emerged not in isolation but in the sediments of lived experiences, from memories, losses, and the conditions that shapes one's perceptions of the world. The story of modern art, especially in the post-independent context, cannot be disentangled from the stories of artists' becoming. Autobiographical art thus offers an alternative method for doing history, one that recognizes the artist's self as both the product and producer of the culture. So, why Husain? Husain's life covers nearly a century of Indian history: colonial rule, independence, partition, globalization. He was not a painter but an active witness. His work draws heavily from personal experiences, childhood memory, artisanal environment, and socio-cultural surroundings. Husain's visual narrative provides a particular insight for analyzing because his life's persona, the works are deeply entangled with trajectory of independent India. Husain reworks the fragments of his childhood, memory, migration, identity into a visual language that articulates larger questions of Indianness, cultural plurality, and the emotional history of the nation. So in the cover, as I mentioned, he had written his own autobiographical writings, notably I am M.F. Husain, M.F. Husain ki kahani apni zubani, and its English interpretation was done by Khalid Muhammad, Where Art Thou, reveals artist who openly stages his life as a shifting dialogue between his child self, Maqbool, and his public persona. So, and even Rashida Husain, who acted as a scribe, editor, and muse to the collaboration of this document. These collaborations demonstrate that Husain's autobiography is not a solitary private narrative, but a co-created cultural document shaped through relationships and dialogues. In an excerpt, Rashida recollects, it says that Rashida collected all the papers, paired chapters to chapter, note to note, and embellished it with drawings made by Husain. So, tracing the self in history. To understand Husain, we have to go back to where he came from. So he was born in the temple town of Pandharpur in 1915. Husain's first encounter with art were devotional and artisanal. His grandfather, Abul, was a tinsmith who crafted lanterns for pilgrims. His father, Fida, worked as an accountant. His mother, Zainab, died when he was 2 years old, an event that would become the emotional nucleus of his life. The story of her death retold in Rashida's narrative that how she circled around his sick body 7 times in prayer before succumbing herself to become the seed for which his lifelong imagery of maternal devotion grew. Amidst the craftsmanship of everyday life, Husain learned that making was an act of care, that the hand and heart worked in unison. When the family moved to Indore, the princely capital of Holkar, Husain encountered a visual world that was once feudal and modern. The streets of Indore were alive with fairs, religious processions, and cinema posters, the very environment that would later populate his canvas. With no formal art training, Husain taught himself by observation and improvisation. He began painting signboards and cinema hoardings to earn a living. These early years shaped his sense of scale, color, and public address. As he once remarks, painting large hoarding under the open sky was not merely labor, it was a performance. In painting for the public, he found his first stage. So the key autobiographical motives in Husain's work, where there are many of them, I have taken these particular 3. One is the child who is trying to fit into his father's shoe. The other is the faceless mother, which is being enacted in many of his paintings. And then the lantern, which is kind of a light of hope in many of his works. So the autobiographical series stands out as created over several decades. The series unfolds like a painterly diary of the 20th century, filtered through the lens of one man's life. Each canvas in the series functions as both memory and meditation, a recollection of childhood loss, discovery, and the allegory of nation. So, So Rashida's account recounts that Husain's mother would place his father's shoes on the child's feet, praying that he would grow into a strong man. This tender image becomes a recurrent motif across the autobiographical canvases, transforming the person into a symbol of continuity and longing. They now stand not for the father, but for the act of becoming, the inheritance of absence, to stand in another's shoes. And maybe because of that, like when we say that in later life he becomes barefoot, even though it was something which happened because of when he went to the funeral of Gajan and Mahadev, and he was not happy with he was not praised for his achievements, etc. But then that is somehow connected. Like later on, he's not even wearing shoes. The second. Another recurring element in autobiography painting is the lamp or lantern, inherited from his grandfather's trade as a tinsmith. The lamp appears as both object and metaphor of relic of craft and a symbol of illumination. In the dim interiors of his childhood, the lamp represents warmth, domesticity, and human ingenuity. By inserting this motif repeatedly into his composition, Husain aligns his own act of painting with his grandfather's labor. Both are markers of light. In autobiography 17, perhaps the emotional core of the series, Husain reimagines the night of his mother's death. The composition is spare, yet charged with intensity. A woman's figure bending over a child surrounded by circular forms that evoke the ritual of the 7 rounds. It's the picture on the left, and the circular motion rendered in sweeping arcs suggests the maternal embrace and cosmic cycle. Now, in this transformation of loss into form, Husain's work resonates deeply with the broader trajectory of Indian modernists, which often sought to reconcile trauma through aesthetic synthesis. Tapati Gohar Thakurta writes that artists of the post-partition era turn to myth and memory to rebuild a sense of continuity. For Husain, autobiography itself becomes mythic. The mother death is infigured as the origin of creation and absence of fuel of art. The autobiography 12, which depicts his aunt Anwar Bidi selling vegetables near the Vithoba temple, extends this maternal imagery into the social realm. The scene of a working woman in a public marketplace fuses personal memory with ethnographic observation. The woman body renders with the same monumental grace in his goddess becomes embellic of endurance. She is both relative and representative. So the Mother series, which we see in a large array of his works, M.F. Husain applies a process of disembodiment to his character. A clear example of this is found in the construction of the Mother. In order to understand it, I do like a butterline notion of the performance as a bodily practice that produces meaning, that is constituting the identity in a perpetuated to be a performativity. Maqbul is motherless. He has no memory of her face, as she died when he was too young to have memories of her devoid of the memory of her face, leaving no photograph or picture that might be used to construct such memories. Husain uses the sign of a nun, a sadhvi cloth that is conventionally disconnected from the notion of motherhood, to construct a body that is devoid of any flesh and facial features. Husain's numerous paintings of Mother Teresa are a proof that place, objects, signs, they all contribute to the construction of the body. Now in the social context, Husain's autobiographical series also marks a shift in the relationship between artist and viewer. In traditional portraiture, the subject presents themselves for recognition. In Husain's autobiographical mode, recognition is displaced. The viewer cannot see Husain in any single image. Rather, they encounter him through repetition, absence, and resonance. The self is thus decentered, made plural. This pluralization of identity reflects Husain's own position as a Muslim artist in a secular yet divided nation. His autobiographical paintings become acts of inclusion, where personal and collective identities overlap with hierarchy. The autobiographical series also serves as a site of dialogue between the local and the global. While deeply rooted in Indian imagery, his modernist formal language aligns it with international art movements. Husain's fragmented composition recall Picasso's Cubism, yet their emotional warmth contrasts sharply with the European detachment. I'm concluding. Throughout the 20th century, scholarly attitude towards autobiography oscillated between skepticism and renewed interest. Barthes proclaims the death of the author, shifted attention away from artist's intention, discouraging biographical reading. Yet paradoxically, from 1960s onwards, we see artists increasingly turn towards autobiography to shape their public persona. Like for example, Joseph Beuys or Cindy Shaw, Louis Bourgeois, and many others. To study the life of and works of M.F. Husain is to confront the porous boundaries between art and history, between the private and the public, and remember that the remembered and the imagined. His oeuvre spanning decades of experimentation, exile, and reinvention demonstrates that art can serve as an archive of emotion as much as a record of event. Across his career, Husain refused to separate the individual from the collective. His life was not simply lived but staged as part of the art. Husain's repetition of his own symbols like the lamp, mother, and a faceless woman reiterates the self as a process of becoming. Each repetition is an assertion of survival, a negotiation between memory and the present.
Very interesting. Very interesting. The challenge here, I suspect, Noreen, is going to be when you talk about memory and mediation, Husain's own myth-making about himself provides a massive challenge, both in his painted works and, of course, in the very many ways he communicated it through interviews, through books, etc., where each episode actually is turned into different stories. So you don't even know which story is the real Husain, if there ever was a real story to his shoes, to his going around bare feet, etc. There are multiple manifestations of that. I think also would be interesting to cover the arc of the emotional depth that he brings into some of his autobiographical works, to how he actually ends up caricaturing it with the Raj series, etc. Somewhere, it's a complete arc somewhere, and within it, the politics I think it becomes very, very critical and
I've done
important.
it in my paper.
I'm sure it
Yeah,
has.
so in that I've sorry, okay. It's on. So in that I have mentioned the Indian series which he painted after he went to exile, self-imposed exile, and there he was he painted the Raj series basically, I guess.
No, the Raj series was done
okay.
in India,
In
beginning
India.
from the 80s through the 90s.
But then is this like
What
how,
we're talking about is the Indian civilization.
Indian civilization series? Sorry, yes sir. So yeah, that is something I have
Well, if
connected.
you're going to be referring to the Indian civilization, you also have to parallel that with what Abhinav
With the-
brought right
yes,
in the
sir.
beginning,
Definitely.
which is the Arabic civilization that he painted for the ruling house of Qatar. So you have two parallels over there as well that become interesting and that you might want to explore. So these are just things that you might want to keep in mind, etc. When you're talking about this. So, just to flag off the conversation over here, Abhinav, if you look at Noreen's paper, for example, where she talks about the autobiographical, and you look at the manifestations of Husain's own life, with legal troubles not only starting, frankly, in 2004 and 2006, the troubles actually started in the mid-20th century. Almost at the beginning in the 60s when he first did the Saraswati drawings, etc. So where does the personal build in to his narrative of the autobiographical in his work, and what legal position do you think he would need to seek, at the end of or towards the autumn of his life, etc., when he was being hounded the way he was?
I'm not sure if I have answer to this, but I would like to comment on it. So basically, when I was reading about Husain, and when we were studying Husain, we start off criticizing Husain first. That's what JNU does, first of all. Then,
And why would it do that?
I mean, I think starting from criticism, actually position, and we do the same with Amrita Shergill as well.
No,
So
but is that criticism or critiquing that you're talking about?
both, I mean, they're just going to show us few pictures.
Would that be right, Shabala?
I mean, if you... Should I comment?
Yes, of course, we want the audience in, of course.
I mean, one of the books that they read is the edited volume by Srimati Ramaswamy, in which there are several positions on Husain,
That's
one of
right.
them being, of course, Patricia Oberoy's very sharp, very humorous, gendered critique of Husain's representation of women. So I think, as usually, 50% of the student's body is women, and it would really come from that. Just the fact that she looks at the figure of the woman as this muse, the construct of the muse is a Western kind of an idea, and how Husain plays with that. And so that essay is hilarious. I recommend that everybody reads it. And then, of course, we also look at the really beautiful, poignant essay by Ananya Jahanara Kabir, for instance, in that, which is, I think, where he's coming from. So, yeah, I mean, we look at all aspects, not just one. That volume actually has everything in it.
All right, okay. So it's not just critiquing, there's a holistic element to all of it. Yeah, to carry on.
Okay, while reading and researching on Husain, the first question which actually erupted in my mind, is he actually radical in the true sense as an artist? Not because we are talking about the identity, and you have also commented that Husain was not the only one who was getting all the legal cases against him, but I have never seen that much of, like, if I can say, propaganda getting these hated speech and all sort of circulation of images. Like one offshoot of RSS was also publishing the nude Saraswati and the Mother Teresa figures that he was like, other religions के आप तो कपड़ों में बना रहे हैं लेकिन सरस्वती और ये सारे तो I've never seen that kind of campaign against other artists, if it's FN Souza or Akbar Kadamsi. So that's what actually keeps Husain's identity as a Muslim there. And also when I started off with, is he actually radical? Because by the end of his lifetime, he actually took this
self-imposed exile. So this question still lingers, where is the identity, and so I'm actually still searching and researching on all these aspects. So
do you think he is radical? You're just asking the question, but now, let's have you answer that.
I'm still not, I would say I'm not in a position to answer this yet. So some of the artworks, yes, but okay, everyone is a scholar, I would want to. So I would refrain from answering that.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think there's the context, there's the subject, there's the technique. All of it goes into the making of art, and you can't isolate one from the other. And radicalization can be any of these. Technique can be radical as well. So of course, how you read it, that position itself, is not also the only position that will get you into the kind of legal troubles that were foisted upon him.
And also how we exhibit the art. Like I was seeing the KNMA Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh exhibition, and he's also a Muslim. He's also, the identity also comes up. He's going to paint about all the Gujarat riots and everything, but it gets dabbed up somewhere. But with Husain, I'm just answering your question, that Husain is somehow radical. Maybe the times are also very tightrope or everything, but and we are talking about Husain still after his death. I'm not sure if this is the answer, but I would think that he was more radical than others.
Well, did he attempt to, suppress that identity anywhere? I don't think Husain did. He was extremely learned about in terms of different religions, etc. There were times, Raza Saab, when we would continuously ask Raza Saab, for example, Shoki, why he did not associate the latter part of his practice with Tantra at all. And he would very strongly say, no, my art has nothing whatsoever to do with Tantra, despite the names being very, very Tantra-driven, etc. Mandala, Yajna, beach, germination, all of that somewhere. So I think he chose to differentiate between identity and the art he was producing. Husain didn't do that. And I think that is possibly the reason, I think that's also the reason why some artists might have been a little more cautious somewhere. Do you think these elements would play into how museums look at collecting? And not just in terms of Husain, but overall, do these contexts come into play? I mean, how much does controversy play into collecting, patronage, and appropriation?
I'm going to answer this question, but I would also take the question you asked, Abhinav, a little further and say that yes, there is this understanding that Husain was on a self-exile, but there is also, and I'm saying this, there is an archival reference where Husain is also saying that he's leaving the country to evade tax. That is also there. So let's just bring those parallels together. And why I'm saying this, because I'm personally really interested in the functioning of the art market and valuation and so on and so forth. So that history should also be accounted for while we look at this person going on a self-exile, who sponsors his stay, what he does. These are all questions that should be asked. Now coming to the question that you asked me, depends on what kind of museum. Is it a state-backed museum? Is it a private museum? So these are, I think, questions that should be factored in to see that, should it be censored? Should it not be censored? And if I have to draw a reference from Europe, it would be the painting Origin of the World. And that kind of censorship are we looking at? Who is it? A private collector who's acquiring? And I was intrigued when Abhinav said, and I didn't have this information, that 2 years after Bharat Mata was collected, it was up on the art market. Why? Did the collector receive a threat? Why did he decide to do away? I think further, to bring out these granular histories.
Okay, so in this case it was plain dealership.
Okay.
That was something more. I mean, very thoughtful. And
That's
there's
a genuine way of
to go
thinking.
into all of this. But
So, yeah.
that was playing the market at that time, simply. I mean, I've had my observations already with the three scholars here. If we can open this up. Yes, please. Okay.
It's here. The Abhinav's, take on the one first that we are saying is not real radical. We do not know what radical is. We'll have to define the borders. So of course he added to that style, all that has to be added. And anyway, when you say that some artist is more radical because he's more direct, you are saying an artist becomes radical at the cost of his art. Because more direct art is a lesser art. I mean, it's directly saying something. So I don't think that works, that whole idea of radical. I think it's only an idea for accusing. It's not an idea for meditating. And this is a very standard way now of rejecting artists. And this has been practiced long back, since 40, 50 years. He's not radical enough, she's not radical enough. How do we decide? Number one. Number two, the question that you are posing is brilliant, that how the censorship took place and how certain images like that of Bharat Mata and all that were questioned. This happens when you have a certain political dispensation in the government who is trying to create a kind of well-defined nation. That nationalism is at the core of all that. And there lies the real problem, which Gandhi addressed, which Tagore addressed, which Tagore actually addressed it in his great book called Charathyaya. Incidentally, I wrote a film. Because you have to standardize everything if you are creating a certain kind of European nation. Now, what is at the center of this whole problem is that when you start creating a certain nation, you will have to standardize all images. Not only all images, all texts. For example, a lot of Ramayans were removed from Delhi University code of Ramanujan's text. Now, without going into that detail of the character of Ram, for example, you have to first make that character one-dimensional, and once you make it one-dimensional, then you stay there, and you create text accordingly. So what happens is that all these problems are very deeply related to this project of nationalism, which we have taken, which we have not discussed enough in post-independent, post-Gandhi Tagore. These questions were not discussed enough by people because we were already busy in taking India to become another Soviet Union. The second is Noreen's, when you say about the circularity in that image where the Husain's mother is dying, there is a parallel. I just wanted to tell you that when Kumar Gandhar, this very great musician, when he goes for the last rites of his wife, there is a bandish which comes into his head. You will find it in YouTube. I remember first two lines. It's Phir aayi mora. Mora is the aam ki bor. Phir aayi mora, ambua ki dar pe. That once again these flowers, the birds have come on the tree of mango, which means that there is, and then of course later he said that circle hai, zindagi jo hai, circle hai. So this is one of the very great consolation that you find in Husain and same in Kumar Gandhar. And then Faceless Mother is also not only that he didn't remember the face, but also it's one of the ways of, this is a Buddhist. In Buddhist sculpture, if you go to Sanchi, and you should go to Sanchi to see these most wonderful reliefs, most of the time Buddha has no face. It is represented either by a cottage or by a tree Buddha is there. In narrative, Buddha is there, but there is no Buddha. So there is no face. So it can also be that Husain was keeping his mother almost at that point, at that level.
That would be true of Hindu iconography also for a long time, where symbols represented godhood rather than actual likenesses.
But here the
that was
God
Raja
is also
Foundation.
personal in Buddha's case. And I loved your idea of Husain leaving the shoes. I thought that it was Gajanan Madhav Muktibodh. Muktibodh is the last word. He was a great writer. कि वो बहुत ही गरीब थे and he couldn't afford shoes etc. चप्पल फटी हुई थी इसलिए छोड़ दिया. लेकिन अगर उसमें पिता के जूते में फिट नहीं हो पाएगा, जिसका another meaning of that is that now the father's shoes or his presence has become so big that no shoes will suffice his big feet now. Thank you.
I have to add to that barefoot story. Because I talked about myth making, there's also the story that Husain goes to visit a beloved who is now in Pakistan and finds that she's just died and has been taken for her funeral, for her cremation, and he walks bare feet to her grave, and that's his homage to whatever. Which is why I said with Husain Sahib you have to be very, very careful with his own myth-making.
If I may just add one thing, in Shangar, the Vatsalya and the erotic love is on the same scale.
Right. Right. All right. We have the audience still? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that, Kishore, you made a point earlier that who causes or who...
Little louder.
Okay. Who actually decides what is obscene, especially in the context of Husain. Because as we know that Souza, for instance, painted a huge nude figure of himself, and there was a lot of outcry against it, and so he covered the painting with a fig leaf. We know about Padamsi. But now with Husain, is there also a kind of vested interest involved in critiquing him? If we look at his nudes, they are mostly asexual. And now I remember there was a show of Husain's at Asia House, London, which was someone's collection. This was in 2012, a year after he died. And I wrote the catalogue for it. The moment that show opened, a whole group of Bajrangas came and got it shut. There was nothing obscene in it, but it was Husain. So, who are these people who are causing this commotion around Husain, and what is their interest in this? It seems to me that it's purely political.
I think, yes, you do need that thing to build a narrative around, and Husain has provided that. But these problematic issues have, I remember curating a show in 2012, January, called The Naked and the Nude, where the Durga Vahini came in, but what had they been told? They had no idea about the exhibition, the show, its dynamics, or what the art historical position it was taking had to do with their protest. They were told that there were photographs. Mind you, how these were taken, nobody questioned. There were photographs of how the girl that we came to know later as Nirbhaya being raped. Those were being exhibited over there, and that's how the RSS organized the Durga Vahini to come in and protest over there. So they needed that point. They got their mileage with the news cameras, etc. The moment the media moved away, they all melted away as well. So these are problematic things that we have to deal with somewhere. And I suspect that, having a certain cohesiveness in approach is also somewhat essential. Ji Shukla.
No, I also wanted to talk about the role of the state and how it's presenting Husain to their advantage when they wish to. And one of the most instructive things for me has been visiting the National Gallery of Modern Art regularly to see what's going on over there. And so on the one hand, you do have a large collection of Husain paintings within GMA. They don't necessarily put them on display. If they do, they put them into some corner. And one of the paintings which really surprised me, which was on display very prominently, was a painting that Husain had apparently made of an army tank in Kashmir.
I've seen that. It was loaned to some regiment.
Yeah, it was given to some regiment. It is about painting this size, very prominently displayed. So you also have the state harnessing him.
Yes. It was on the Kargil war.
In a very
much.
way.
I remember seeing this as well a number of times. Very much so. But at the same time, they moved Zameen from that place where you rarely saw it now onto the main gallery. So there was a question there, I think.
Hello, my question is to you, Shant. So I just wanted to know what are your archival sources? Like you didn't mention any name and citation.
Yeah, a citation. The
Like
paper has citation.
No, I just wanted to know from your words, archival sources.
Right.
You mentioned many images,
Yeah.
letters, which are precious. And just wanted to
Which
know
are, pardon?
which are more valuable,
Right.
right, and hard to access.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to know your sources.
Yeah, of course.
So, and one suggestion is that since you are already PhD holder.
No, my viva is due.
Okay.
In interim.
Okay, so thank God your viva is due. So there is some suggestion for you. I just wanted to convey that you should mention image courtesy, which are not there in presentation.
I took all those images.
So I just need the proper citation. You took all the images, agree,
Yeah.
but there are no mention, like you are announcing that you आपने वो photo ले लिया, लेकिन as a layman मुझे नहीं पता चल रहा कि वो
The collection.
क्या है.
Right, so at the onset of my presentation, I did mention that I was collected during my Fulbright year from the Raza Foundation, from the Peabody Essex Museum, from the Phillips Museum. Now, there are ways for a researchers, and many a times researchers would also not like to reveal their archive because that's my bank, you see. And I'm really grateful that I was allowed to photograph. In many archives, you're not even allowed to photograph. So yeah, so that's that.
So are you aware of Aesthetica magazine from New York?
Yes, what about it?
Please don't offend, but I found like your research is very clear.
Yeah.
I understood very well. But while presentation, you in introduction you mentioned according to me, my assumption. I don't think it should be mentioned. वो सब conclusion में आता है, like your opinion, your interpretation. So
आप जब editor बन जाओगे, edit it out.
Yeah. Anything else? We're concluding. Anyone else?
Just one.
Okay, we'll take that as the last question and then
So
we'll
just
wind up.
very small 3 remarks. Firstly, I was just looking at Abhinav's paper and I was just wondering about how you were separating the artwork from the persona, and then you were quoting Gamboni, and then you were saying, but if you look at what I could understand was that Gamboni looks at the idea of art, the artwork and the persona, and art as a social object and its destruction as part of its creation, and very strongly situated. And I'm not sure how the separation of artwork and the persona is working vis-a-vis Gamboni. I totally understand your point. You are sort of separating. The second, I think, Shatavisha. Again, your use of the critic Arthur Danto, and I'm not, again, where on the one hand you're talking of patronage, diplomacy, art as a very socially constructed art, but when you're looking at Danto is looking at the idea of very strong situatedness of the artwork within an art discourse. So I'm not again sure of that. And finally, Noreen, again, use of Butler, I'm not sure, because Butler works in a very specific gender discourse, but to use Butler for M.F. Husain, again, not very sure. Thanks.
Okay, I think that was great observations. Thank you. I won't ask for responses to that one over here. Husain Saab, radical, however we define it, I think he's going to keep us talking about him over the next few centuries. So more strength to him. Thank you, Ashokji and the Raza Foundation for doing this. And see you on the other side.